Okay, Mr. Watson here, and in this video we're going to look at arousal and activation as part of mental preparation for sport performance. So arousal is something we looked at AS. We went through the theories of arousal, and this is how Cambridge breaks up arousal across the 2 years. So quite simply today we're looking to give it a definition and look at its relationship with certain aspects that can enhance performance. So, for our definition, we're going to look at arousal as being the intensity of our behavior, and that behavior is related to the motivation, how motivated we are. So, as you can imagine, arousal can be positive or negative, okay? We could be motivated, we might not be motivated, okay? Or it can be known as the amount of drive we experience to achieve something, okay? So we're just going to look at something. So let's look at the physiology. So what are the physiological effects of arousal? Okay. And these physiological effects occur with the psychological ones, which we'll come on to in a moment. Okay. So what the physiological effects are, we have an increase in heart rate, increase in breathing rate, and a production of sweat. These are the things that just naturally happen as we become aroused. Okay, now we're going to look at what we can do if we control arousal and what can happen if we don't control arousal. Because what's important to understand is arousal can neither be positive or negative on performance. A person can have high levels of arousal if they're winning or losing. So if you're winning, you could still be highly aroused. If you're losing, you could still be highly aroused. Okay, it's how you control the arousal which will dictate how you perform. Okay, so let's look. If we can control our arousal, we have a state of readiness to perform. So whether that's low, moderate, or high, if we're controlling that arousal, we become ready to perform. So even if we have high arousal and we're controlling it, we have that state of readiness. Okay, it can enhance performance and it causes us to be more alert. Okay, so in them, and we'll come on to this in another video, in the zone of optimal functioning, some people have that optimal functioning at a higher arousal. But then we were thinking, oh, well, that links to negatives. No, if they're controlling that high arousal, they can still be alert, they can still have a good performance, and they're ready to perform. So just like an MMA fighter, for example. However, if we don't control the arousal and it gets too high, known as high over aroused, we can start to worry and we can start to become anxious, and anxiety linking to that stress on performance. Okay? So, just to repeat, it's how arousal is used by the performer that dictates future performance. Okay? It's important to understand that part of it. Okay, we now need to look at a definition of what is activation. So this is known as the RAS, the reticular activating system. Again, I mentioned this with personality. I put it in them tables. So this is something that's located in the central core of the brainstem, and this maintains our levels of arousal. It maintains that drive, that motivation. Okay. Now, what research is saying in psychology is that it can either enhance or stop, inhibit, okay, incoming sensory stimuli. So extroverts tend to inhibit and introverts tend to enhance the stimuli, they intensify it. So what was concluded is that this is the reason introverts dislike high arousal conditions, because they're looking to take a break. Their RAS is already easy to stimulate. It over intensifies things. So they quite like quieter or low arousal conditions. But extroverts seek that high arousal conditions with the higher arousal levels because their RAS system, it lacks stimulation. Okay, so they go seeking it because they want that feeling. Okay, so that's just a quick one on the RAS. So now what we're going to look at is look at arousal and activation and their relationships. So they are related to some specific things. So we have task complexity. So task complexity. So if we remember back to AS, we have fine controlled movements and we have gross movements. So what research suggests is that with fine controlled movements such as archery, pistol shooting, darts, arousal should be lower for optimal performance. Okay, not under aroused, just lower arousal conditions. So as you can imagine, gross movements such as weightlifting, shot put, arousal should be higher for optimal performance. Okay, so that's its relationship with task complexity. We then have personality. So, like we've just said with the RAS, extroverts are said to be able to cope with higher levels of arousal because their RAS lacks stimulation. So they seek it and they can cope with that higher arousal condition because their RAS system is not over intensifying it. So they can cope with higher levels of arousal. And then obviously we've got the opposite. Introverts, they're more likely to perform well under low arousal conditions. Okay? And our final relationship is ability level. So highly skilled athletes, they can cope with higher levels of arousal because this also links back to AS if we think of the motor program model. They're deemed to be performing autonomously, okay? They need little conscious attention. So because they're not thinking about the actual skill, okay, that they can cope with higher arousal. Now, if you have a beginner athlete, a novice, they're processing a lot of the information from the environment stimuli, but they're also thinking a lot about the skill they're performing, their own ability. They're still trying to improve. So it's researchers suggested that lower levels of arousal are better. And obviously these things can change. It is psychology. So, but that's just three relationships between arousal and activation. So a little short video there. Pause as you go through it, and that's just introducing it. Okay, thank you.